This being Pride Month, it seems a good time to introduce you to the man who was Canada's first openly gay judge. He just retired from the bench, but not before putting his own unique stamp on the job. He was badly bullied as a kid, even considered suicide. But that all served to give him an empathy that came in very handy in court. And with that, we welcome back to TVO, Harvey Brownstone. Lovely to have you in that chair again.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I want to just start by, we're going to tell a bit of your story here, and then, through the courts, and then what you're doing now that you've left the bench and so on. And your story starts in France, of all places, where you were born, and you end up in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Now, how did that happen?
My mom was married and had me, and decided to leave France with me, and came to Hamilton to visit a sister. And when she got there, the sister took her to the Jewish Community Center, which was a big deal for my mom because she'd been through the Holocaust and was still traumatized by the idea of being public about being Jewish. And my dad was the director, and they met, and she stayed.
At what age did you start to notice that you were getting bullied for being who you are?
Oh, very early. I was very, very badly bullied at school, probably from the age of 8 or 9.
Did you understand why?
No, I didn't understand that there was anything different about me, but the other kids saw it. Maybe I was flamboyant, maybe a little outrageous, I don't know. I would run around reciting dialogue from I Love Lucy. Maybe most kids didn't do that. And that triggered a lot of bullying.
At what age? So you say you didn't realize that at the time that you were gay. When did that revelation come to you?
Around the age of 12 or 13, around puberty, I suddenly realized that the attractions I was having were not the same as what I had been programmed to be attracted to, and it caused a lot of distress.
So this is 1960s, 70s, Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah.
So how much support would there have been for somebody who had those views back then?
Zero. And certainly my parents, when I finally told them I was 19, they took it very, very badly, and I was basically ejected from the home.
Let me just understand that. You realized at 12 that you were gay. You didn't tell your parents for another 7 years?
That's right. I assumed that it would go away, that I just hadn't met the right girl yet. Then when I went away to university and I was 19 years old, I told them because I finally figured out, okay, I'm gay. And that was a big mistake to tell them then because I was still financially dependent on them, and they cut me off. So I spent 5 years on welfare, getting myself through university and law school, and then we reconciled.
How did you tell them?
I told them that I had feel that I was born that way, and that I hoped that they would not see me any differently. I wasn't any different than the person they always knew me to be, but the reaction was extremely negative.
Now, of course, me being from Hamilton, I knew your parents very well. Our parents knew each other. I've known your parents my whole life. Your dad ran an athletic center. He ran a community center. He was a macho, athletic guy. How did he take to this?
He took it very well because he had a social work background. It was my mom that I think she felt somehow responsible for me being gay. She really felt that she must have done something wrong. And it took her a long time to come to terms with it, but she did, and we reconciled. And in fact, I invited them to my law school graduation because I wanted them to see that I had made something of myself, that I could make them proud of me in some way. Rejection is a very strong motivator, and it made me an overachiever. So I graduated from law school, top of my class, and then I was very determined to be a successful lawyer, and then that wasn't good enough. I had to become a judge, all to please them, really.
And you really considered suicide along the way?
I did. In my darkest time, when my parents had cut me off and I found myself alone at Queen's University with no money, I called suicide prevention, and they put me on hold.
I know, I read that. That's crazy.
And I was so angry that they were putting me on hold, and then I thought to myself, you don't really want to die, or you wouldn't be angry, you wouldn't care. So I hung up, and I decided that must have been a sign.
Good for you. How did you determine that you wanted to be a judge?
I was very disappointed with a number of judges I appeared in front of as a lawyer. I was a criminal lawyer, and I never lost a trial. I did very well as a lawyer. I think that juries liked me because I had a rather unusual personality in the courtroom, and I could connect on an emotional level.
Which side were you representing?
I was a defense counsel.
Okay.
I tried to be a Crown attorney, but they wouldn't hire me because I was gay. So but I felt that the judges I was appearing in front of were remote. They didn't understand poverty, they didn't understand mental illness, they didn't understand domestic violence, they didn't understand substance abuse, which is really the clientele of a criminal court. And I always told myself that if I ever had the chance to become a judge, I would try to be more human, I would try to connect, pierce that veil through the robe and all of the jargon and legalese and procedure, and try to reach people and connect with them and make them understand that we really care about what's happening to them in their lives. So I decided I would try to become a judge.
And how does one do that? I mean, you need to get appointed by somebody, obviously. How did that happen?
You apply for the provincial bench, and even for the Superior Court, you apply. And on the provincial bench, there's an interview process. If you make it through what they call discreet inquiries, and they're anything but discreet, you then get an interview, and then a list goes to the Attorney General, who decides from that list who to appoint.
And who picked you? Who was the AG?
The AG was Marion Boyd.
NDP government.
Yes.
Did that reflect your politics at all?
No, I was never a very political person, but I was known because prior to being a judge, I was the director of the Child Support Enforcement Program, the Family Responsibility Office, and I had briefed the Attorney General several times, so she knew who I was.
Gotcha. Now, it was 13 years ago, just last week, that you were in this studio. We were sitting over there, actually. We were talking about a book that you'd written called Tug of War, talking about the goings-on in your court. Shall we just remind everybody a little bit of what you said back then and there? Let's do that, shall we? Sheldon, roll the clip if you would.
Frequently, well, in Toronto and in most of the large centres in Canada, we're looking at 70% of litigants with no lawyers.
People represent themselves.
They represent themselves either because they can't afford legal representation, or they've watched Judge Judy on TV and they think that no one has a lawyer on that show. Why can't they come there and just tell their story, and then the judge will give them a decision?
Do you prefer it that way, when people represent themselves?
I think any judge will tell you that people who try to represent themselves are making a huge mistake, because the court system was never designed to be navigated by people with absolutely no training or legal advice.
Okay, first of all, what happened to the mustache?
I decided to remove it.
Apparently. All these years later, we're now 13 years on from that interview. Do people still think that they are the best people to represent themselves in your courtroom?
Yes, by far. In fact, after the interview, I learned that the correct percentage of people appearing in family court without lawyers in the Toronto region is 82%. So it's an enormous number of people who feel that they don't need to hire a lawyer because it's their life, it's their story. Why should they pay somebody to tell their story? Or they can't afford it and they don't qualify for legal aid because of the ridiculous eligibility thresholds for legal aid. So they're stuck representing themselves. And unfortunately, for the vast majority of those people, they make a mess of their court case, they make a mess of their lives, they don't, their issues are not resolved in a way that lend themselves to these parents cooperating and communicating with each other better at the end of the court case than they did at the beginning.
So what's a better way to go?
Well, let me say, first of all, you will often hear people say that we have the best family court system in Canada of any place in the world. That's true, but I don't know anyone who, if they had the chance to reinvent, to recreate the family court system now, no one would create the system we have now. It's adversarial, it's overloaded. What we need for people who are going through a family breakup and can't arrive at resolutions of their custody and access issues or their financial issues is counseling. Because people have to get past their feelings of anger and betrayal and pain of the breakup so that they can communicate with each other in a way that is that reinvents themselves from ex-partners to co-parents.
You had a great line, Harvey, which you, I presume, used on numerous occasions in your courtroom, which was to divorcing parents, you need to love your children more than you hate each other. That's great advice. Did many parents take you up on that advice?
I wish I could say yes. The fact is that the vast majority of people who go through a marriage breakup, and let's not kid ourselves, it's huge. And that the divorce rate is 50%, but that's just people that get married. If you add common law couples to that, we're looking at 80% of couples break up. Only 5% of those people ever end up in a courtroom. So 95% of people who break up manage somehow to negotiate, maybe with the help of a lawyer, maybe with a family member, a clergyman, and they resolve.
But the 5% you saw.
But the 5% we saw are people who become very, very obsessed and very fixated on their particular issues, whether it's infidelity or money trouble or in-laws or bad cooking. I've seen it all. And they
So somebody want a divorce over bad cooking?
I've seen people divorce over air miles being taken from one to the other.
I want to talk about a few of your cases here, and I'm going to use some blunt language here because this was the language that you heard in your courtroom. On one occasion, you had a bully in your courtroom who broke another kid's nose, and when you asked him why he did that, the response back was, because he's a faggot. And you being the sexual orientation that you are, I wonder how you responded to that.
I was a judge about 3 months at the time. I remember that case like it was yesterday because the victim, the little boy and his parents were sitting in the front row of the courtroom. And I asked this young offender, why did you beat this kid up and break his nose? And he said, because he's a faggot. And I said, well, you look at this. This is what faggots grow up to be now. And there was a gasp in the courtroom, really an audible gasp in the courtroom. And then I sent the kid into custody. And the little boy in the front row, whose mouth his jaws were wide open, I said to him, I did that for you and for me and for every other kid that's ever been bullied. So I hope I made a difference in that little boy's life, that you can reach all your aspirations, whether you're gay or straight or plaid.
Do you ever get to find out what happened to the people that you sentenced? That kid, for example, who broke the other kid's jaw. Do we ever know what happened to him?
No, but if you're a judge in a small town, you probably see the same people over and over again. But no, it's very disappointing. And same in family court. You have these couples coming in front of you, sometimes for years, and then the case ends, usually because the kids grew up. That's really the only way the case settles, often, and you never find out.
Harvey, the response that you came back to that defendant with is nothing that probably any other judge in the province of Ontario would have uttered, and yet you said it. What gave you the idea to come out that bluntly and say that?
Well, it was a moment of truth for me. This was an opportunity for me to educate that young man. Clearly, when he said to me, well, he's a faggot, it was because he assumed that I would understand that that's a perfectly reasonable justification to beat somebody up. And I knew that if I just went on to some kind of diatribe about how that's terrible to be bigoted and prejudiced, I wouldn't have the same impact on that boy if I said, really? Well, I'm a faggot too. And it just was, like I say, a moment of truth. It was never my intention to come out on the bench. I think everyone knew I was gay when I was appointed. It was never a secret. But I knew that sometimes you have to be true to yourself and you have to be authentic and you have to impact emotionally. And there isn't enough of that in the courtroom. And I know I'm unique. I know I was a very unique judge. But I can tell you that the feedback I got from lawyers and from litigants over the years reinforced to me that it's very important that people see judges as human beings who understand what they're going through and who also have gone through things in their own lives.
Mr. Justice Brownstone also brought a sense of humor into the courtroom, as evidenced by this next story. One of your defendants accused of defacing public property, and you said to said defendant, "Don't you dare deface anyone else's property ever again, because if you do, sir, I'm going to put you in a place where you just might find yourself getting defaced, if you catch my drift." Get it? Got it? Good. Did you ever catch any flack for talking that way in court?
Sometimes. There are always people that are going to have a vision of what a judge should be and how a judge should behave in the courtroom. And I'm sure that I raised plenty of eyebrows, and frankly, I couldn't care less. Because the people that mattered to me were the people that were in front of me in the courtroom, and they understood. I'll tell you something, Steve, that really affected me very much as a lawyer. I remember many times having judges issue a decision, and then they would leave the courtroom, and my client would say to me, "What just happened?" And it always bothered me that I was the one that had to explain to the client what the judge just decided. And I vowed that if I ever became a judge, I would speak plain language. I would make it very clear what it is I'm deciding and why. And if that means using vernacular, well, so be it. But at least people were clear about what I was saying.
You did, though, during the course of your years on the bench, see some of the most dysfunctional, heartbreaking, awful family dynamics around. I mean, you just did. Do you have any understanding of what toll that may have taken on you personally?
Well, I think anyone that works with that particular segment of the population, family court is particularly toxic, and criminal court is particularly tragic. I think you have to develop what I call an emotional Teflon, so that it doesn't penetrate. You have empathy, you have compassion, you bare your soul in that courtroom, but you learn to forget it. You develop short-term memory loss so that you move on to the next case and you don't think about it a whole lot. And I'm lucky I didn't have a lot of emotional distress in the job.
Well, let's not talk about the next case. Let's talk about the next mission. Your next mission, which you are now currently engaged in, you're the guy behind the Harvey Brownstone interviews. You've got a YouTube channel with, hundreds of interviews I'm gathering up there right now. How many YouTube subscribers do you have for that?
We have close to 4,000 YouTube subscribers, and we have millions of people watching the show on the website.
What do you like about doing these interviews? And you do, these are show business interviews, right? It's not about the law at all, really. In some respects, you're interviewing the people that you loved as you grew up. What do you like about this?
Well, I always wanted to be a talk show host. And in fact, my favorite episode was the one where I interviewed the person I consider to be the best interviewer in Canada, Mr. Steve Paikin. And your interview went viral. Thank you for doing that. But I'm
going to interrupt you here. You've had some serious big names, though, right?
We've had some big names. We've had some big music stars. We've had sports figures. We just recently had Robert Wagner on the show.
R.J. Wagner.
Yes, and that was a great honor because he doesn't do interviews.
Lucy Arnaz, Melissa Manchester, Joan London.
Joan Van Ark. We've had George Shakiris. We've had many, Air Supply. We've had people from all...
Are you all out of love, Harvey? That's an Air Supply.
I'm all out of love.
Anyway.
The thing for me was that I used to watch talk shows with celebrities and be frustrated that I didn't think that the interviewer asked the right questions. I didn't feel like I got to know the celebrity. And I always wanted to do an interview show. And when I used to examine and cross-examine witnesses in court, I was interviewing them. That's how I approached court. I interviewed people. And so I decided to create a hobby and create a YouTube channel and see if I could get some celebrities to come on the show, and it kind of took off.
It's absolutely great. You had Ronald Reagan and Ronald Reagan's daughter on, Patty Davis. Now, this is interesting because they frequently, because you're interviewing somewhat controversial people, they're frequently telling you, okay, we'll do it, but you can't talk about X, Y, and Z, right? Like Patty Davis doesn't want to be interrogated about her father and her mother and all of this. And yet somehow you sneak away in there and you get it done. How do you do that?
I find that if you can create a comfort level with the guest, they will open up. You know, Lucy Arnaz was on the show. I was told by her manager not to ask her about her parents. She's tired of talking about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. She wants to talk about her career. And at one point in the interview, I said to her, you know, there must have been something about the way you were raised because you're so grounded, you're so centered.
Oh, that's clever.
And she suddenly started talking about her parents and continued to talk about her parents, and it was very poignant. And same with Nancy Reagan's daughter. She ended up saying some pretty powerful things. I guess it's just, I've spent my life in a courtroom questioning people. And so I seem to have a way to get them to open up. And I'm very happy when they say to me, as Robert Wagner said, this is a man who's 91 years old, and he said, this is the best interview I've ever had in my life.
You know, what comes into my mind when I see you do your thing, and you're excellent at it, I got to say.
Thank you.
You remember Brian Linehan, who was another Hamiltonian. And people used to say to Brian Linehan all the time, my goodness, how did you find that out? Or where did you get that? You've done your research. You hear that all the time, don't you?
I hear it all the time, but I think that that's my job, as you know very well. You're so well prepared. You've done so much research. I think that if I'm going to have a guest on the show who's given me the kindness to come on my show, they don't get paid to do it, and many of them are not promoting anything. They just agreed to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. The least I can do is be prepared and ask them interesting questions that they've never been asked before. So I watch their other interviews, and if they've written a book, I've read it. And I'm loving the fact that people seem to resonate with these interviews.
I'm going to ask you one last thing, which is, you've told us about what it was like to be a gay man growing up in Hamilton all those years ago. And now here we are all these years later, in 2022. How far have we come? How far do we still have to go?
We've come a long way, for sure. I have to tell you, one of the most surreal moments for me as a judge was when I finally got to officiate at same-sex weddings, because I did perform a lot of wedding ceremonies for straight people. And it felt so weird to be bestowing this status of marriage on people, knowing that I could never have it myself. And then when same-sex marriage came along, I realized that we had really turned a huge corner. And yes, there's work to be done. Certainly there's work to be done for the trans community. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of discrimination. Bullying is still a big issue. It's a big issue for children, and it's a big issue for many adults too in the workplace. And it even exists in the judiciary. There's no place where it doesn't happen. So I think we all have to hopefully develop more compassion and more empathy and a sense of equality for our fellow man.
Well said. Harvey Brownstone, it's so great having you back in this studio. I wish you continued success with the Harvey Brownstone interviews, which are just wonderful. And people, of course, can find those on YouTube. Be well.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.